Okay, in today's episode, we're going to have a look at what happens when work that you've already done needs to be redone. Okay, so in episode 69, we're going to have a look at my transmission tunnel. So last episode, we finished up the carbon fiber doors. While the doors are off the car, I started having a look at the next projects going forward. I needed to get the transmission bolted in, and when I bolted it up, the transmission tunnel was really high. So I have no idea how I made this mistake. You can go back in the episodes, it's a long time ago now, and you can see when I built that transmission tunnel and what I did, but it wasn't going to work. And sometimes that happens on projects. So we're going to have a look today at how we're going to turn that transmission tunnel mistake into an opportunity to fix a whole bunch of things. All right, so you know, as usual, grab a coffee, come on along, and we'll have a look at how we get a bunch of these problems fixed. Okay, that gets you a look inside the car at what I think is the problem. So you can see the shifter, as I'm just trying to get this lit so it's not completely terrible, but... Okay, so shifter is here. That's the top of the old, the tunnel that I put in it. And that was a rubber boot I was going to use, so that's going to end up looking like garbage. Don't like that. Okay, so the other problem was as you're shifting, because it's sitting a bit too high, it was hitting the steel. I think you can see that it's hitting right there. Okay, so I got a little savage with it the other evening. I think I need to cut it down to about there, but you can see I've got that much room that I can give it. So at this point, I think it's best to just whip the top off the tunnel, make a new top for it, and also make it so I can access the shifter. But the first rule of fabricating this kind of stuff is at this point, you have to get rid of the parts that you're not going to use. So I'm not going to use this stock shifter. I am going to use a fancy shifter. So I better put the fancy shifter in now to make sure that I have enough clearance for everything. And I'll show you a little bit of that here in a sec. So when I pulled the box open that had the shifter in it, of course, it's got this as a shift arm. Now, that's a lovely carved CNC machine piece. It's beautifully anodized, a sort of gold color. And it might look great in your late model Mustang, right? You know, zoom, zoom, zoom. But in a vintage car, I think it's going to look really ridiculous. Now, in a Mustang, of course, I think the shift boot actually covers this carved CNC aluminum piece. So I'm not going to be putting this shifter in the car. I didn't know that until today. But... I've got the stock shifter that I pulled off the car when I pulled the transmission out of the junkyard. So let's have a look and see if I can get that stock shifter carved into something that looks a little more appropriate for the car. Well, I thought I'd try it in anyway at the start. So here's the actual shift mechanism in place, and then there is the gold carved CNC goofy looking shifter. So I put it in and I tried whatever. I just went, whatever. So off it comes. So this is where the decisions are getting made. I found that piece of tube that I needed, so on we go with the new shifter. So in my pile of stuff over in the corner, I had a piece of 1-inch DOM tubing, 120 wall, so that's about 3/4 of an inch on the inside. That's exactly what I need to fit over the spigot coming out of the shifter. And you can see the difference in the two shifters. The aluminum fancy pants thing that came with it is just not going to work. It's just way too sort of fat and clunky and whatever. And the stock shifter's fine. The rubber boot fits over it great. I just need to be able to make a little adapter. So on we go and making the adapter. So I've got a little bit of, that's 3/8, so it'll be 10 mil steel plate there, and I am sort of designing on the fly, and I don't actually like doing this. So I don't know what you guys are like, but I'm usually kind of uncomfortable doing this way, because sometimes you'll try ideas and it's a little bit more like hacking than I'd like. Anyway, so I thread those with some M6 threads, and I usually thread the steel first and then I cut out the small part later. Just
I've done this a lot, so it's just the most efficient way for me to work is to cut it after I get everything done there. And you can start to see I'm lining it up on the tube. Then I know I have to fillet this out. I've got some washers to space it apart at about the right separation distance that I'd like those two parts that are going to make the tube into a clamp. So I've got those sitting in there. And then it's quickly off with the thick black powder coat that was on this shifter originally. Lovely stuff, but yeah, you can't weld through paint. So out it comes. Decisions are getting made on the fly here. I'm not used to projects that are go quickly. I can tell you that. Having done all the composite work for the last year, it's been very slow going. So I almost forget what it's like to accomplish something quickly. So anyway, so on we go with that part, and we're making headway here very quickly. But I'm still sort of designing as I'm going. So I'm thinking lots of, okay, how does this have to work? Well, I need to be able to connect the shifter on the top through as much area of the part as I can. So you can see I've cut a small steel disc, and that's out of 6 mil plate. And I'm going to weld it almost all the way around. But I will, of course, leave about half of it open. And I did have to grind on that small 6 mil plate. I ground it down so even when fully clamped, the plate won't be interfering with the clamp's ability to clamp onto the shifter itself, right? So getting it propped up whatever way I can with the TIG, and then getting the TIG welds put in here. So the shifter's never coming apart. And then once it's all done, then you cut the gap, right? Sorry that I sort of blocked the camera view there in the middle of it, but that's kind of how those things go. Anyway, so that's it, finished. Then we go back in and I start the process of unspot welding the tunnel. So I don't know how you guys do this, but I usually just drill a hole through the into the center. I use a 1/8, so a 3 mil bit, just so I can spot the middle easily first, and then I drill the size, and then I go in with the air chisel, and it's amazing how quickly you can knock that stuff out, right? So it unpins quite nicely and neatly. You don't end up destroying the panel or making a big mess, but you can see how much area in there that the old tunnel was sort of blocking in terms of usable area that I'm going to need in this car. So, for example, there's an HVAC unit that you don't see. It's actually sitting over in the corner, and I've tried it in and out a couple of times that I didn't have the video running. But I need to be able to get that in the car as well, right? So it's Canada. We're going to need heat, and air conditioning's nice, so I'd like to have that too. And it'll go in the spot in the passenger footwell area that you can see on the left, and it'll fill that area quite nicely. Anyway, so just making a few decisions. I know what the heights are that I need here, but I'm not exactly sure how all this is going to play out. I can see on the new shifter that it's round and not square, so I'm making a round little doodle off the top there to give me a dimension. And then the pink styrofoam. So I needed a 1 inch riser would space the area perfectly to have it reasonably level and to sort of go for a look I was going for. So I start trimming out the tunnel. I've got to build a little shelf there at the top, and you can see where all the constraints are, where all the problems are. Again, I prefer to use snips rather than get in there with the wheel of death. Like, I just can't imagine how to do that. And if you've ever wondered why there's gaps in my welding bench, I just showed you why there's gaps in my welding bench. So it makes doing things like cutting sheet metal really super simple. So now I take that paper pattern, transfer it over, and then I've built a hammer form really quickly. But so for all the sheet metal experts out there, I sort of built the hammer form incorrectly, but it's all the material I have. Again, I'm trying not to go out and shop during the pandemic outbreak here. So instead of doing it as a whole area and having the recessed area be a negative, I'm actually going to do it the other way around, which is trickier when you're hammer forming. So I've just used some aluminum as the plate that I'm using on the bottom side. And I've got a steel chunk on the top just because it's what I had lying around. And then I've got a series of corking tools that I'm going to use. So the first one is just some high molecular weight plastic that I've rounded over. And it basically gets the party started with the bending, right? So it just puts the gentle bend in. You never want to rush sheet metal because it'll fight back. So I start off sort of gently with that. It puts the first little bend in, and then you get after it with, in that case, a bricklaying chisel that I've rounded over. Now, once you're done with it, it'll be a bit like a taco chip. So you need to stretch the edges back out. So that's all I'm doing here, using the edge of the bench, using the rail that I have, using basically whatever I can get after to get that stretched out flat again. And it does flatten out nicely. All right, so I'm now going to build the part that fits in there. And I am using those two pieces of tube to pinch the sheet metal, and then I use a hand file to straighten it out however I like. It's the best way to make sheet metal nice and straight, just using hand tools. No sparks flying everywhere, no mess, well, there's mess, but not the same amount. Nice and safe, controlled, which I really like because I like my sheet metal to be accurate. I like everything to be accurate. It just makes me happy, so I do what I can. Right, so now I've got that started, and then I'm going to go over and sort of do the hammer form the right way with the router. So I'm just, I got a 1/4 inch round over bit in the router, and I've made a little wooden die in essence, and I'm going to dimple the panel. I have made a video on how to dimple panels. It's got lots of views. Please watch it. It's kind of fun. It's not hard to do. You don't need dies. I can make a hole and raise the edge of it to any size, any shape that I like. It's not hard work, folks. This is just one evening. You have to remember what's going on with the sheet metal, right? So you're going to be stretching areas. So you have to stretch the metal through the hole because you're going to increase the diameter of that hole, and that's going to result in things not being flat. So then you need to flatten them out. And then I've got the old Roper Whitney hole punch out. Again, I don't like drilling holes in sheet metal. I see it on YouTube all the time. Buy yourself a decent hole punch. You put the holes right where you want them. No problem at all. Okay, so with that done, I then transfer those holes. I'm just using a white marker here. It's sheet metal. It doesn't have to be perfect. You can always adjust stuff a little bit later if needed. And I'm going to be putting in some riv nuts, right? So these are it's kind of an aircraft thing actually, but they're becoming popular in the automotive world. I've used them for years. And that's my riv nut setter, I should say, pulling an M4 riv nut. Be careful. It's super easy to pull the threads right out of those riv nuts with that aircraft tool. Anyway, so now the shift boot, it attaches. So I'm going to lay the holes out for where it goes. 2 of those holes go in that lid on the cover plate, and 2 of those holes go through and will attach to the flange that I've made on the inside. So they're an M6 screw, so I've got them put in. And once I'm done with that, then it's time to do the bending of the form. So I put it in the brake and just snap the 2 sides up. It took longer to get the brake out and put it away again than it did to do the job. So just takes seconds and you're done. Now we cut out the recess, now that everything is rendered in the part that we need. So the recess goes in, and I round the corners out with the angry end there with the die grinder at the round over bit. And again, just using hand files to touch up and make sure things are nice and square and tidy on the inside. Okay, so I've got the back edges cut out. You didn't think I was leaving it as some giant monolithic plank, did you? And then I'm just going to hand form those radiuses because I don't have any dies that would actually allow me to do that comfortably. So I just fold it to the shape that I'd like to fold it. And I'm just cleaning off the leftovers from the grinder in there. And then I'm going to go in, mark it out really carefully, and then you got to trim it up. And then it's time to get it all welded back in together. So we just tack it up first, try it in the car probably half a dozen times to make sure it's all fitting the way I'd like it to fit. Make sure things are square before you get them all welded up. So enjoying that process, never. But finally got that piece in there. So now I've got a shelf to attach everything to. Still have lots of clearance over the transmission. Get that welded on. And then I will, I'll finish up the weld on the tunnel, but you'll notice that the edges of the transmission, they get rounded out at the edges. So I'm going to have to do a little bit of shaping on the sheet metal and add some area there so that it fits nicely over that tunnel. And you can't really pull sheet metal. You can see there, I've started shaping it. You can't really pull it to your wants and desires. It's either fits nicely or don't even try. Anyway, so here we are welding it up. I love TIG welding sheet metal. I find it such a fantastic process. So 045 wire, it's a 16th inch. So what is that? 1.2 mil tungsten at about 30-40 amps just for the weld. I have softened the edges of those welds before I've, or the sheet metal before I've welded them up. And then when you're done, I didn't even, like, there's not much to making this look nice. That's my little 3-inch dual action sander there getting put to work, making those edges just perfect. Okay, with everything else done, the tunnel now goes in. I had taken a few snaps for Instagram. I am on Instagram if you want to follow me there. It's sort of fun you get a little bit more quick updates than I could give you through the videos. But and now I'm just doing the final fit up. Throwing a few tech screws in just to hold it, and then I'm using my that flat bottom drill. So I grind a drill to make a flat bottom. And you spray with weld through primer, but don't weld through primer. It's not really what it's meant to do. It'll give you porosity and poor welds, and it's just terrible. I hate it. Every single brand, every single type, none of it works. So I go in, I clean the paint off the steel before I weld it. It's fine. You're going to melt it out of there anyway, right? So then you go in and you don't have any problems with getting your welds to go. You just watch, bang, 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 bang. You're just holding it there with the hammer just to tighten it up a bit. It doesn't take any time. I get almost a perfect little button weld every single time with that technique. So, okay, I just wanted to give you a real clear look at how this all works. So these are just little M4 screws. Fit in the plate. Okay, with the screws out, we can see that cover plate comes off. We've got provision on the plate for the shift boot, and then I have enough room inside. Now this shifter is going to go in with socket-headed cap screws, not the regular 13 mil, whatever those are, M8 bolts, but I do have the stock M8 bolts holding things down in here right now. So you can see there's there's just barely enough room for any of this, actually. Like, I can't quite get my paws in to pull this fourth one out, so I left it out. Anyway, the shifter then comes up, and you can turn it, and it comes straight out. Then back in. So there's a cup that it has to align with in the transmission, and there's enough room in there that we should be able to get that, you know, because you can get it straight out, right? And then tilt, and out it comes. Now, it's very unlikely that you'll ever have to take the shifter out of the transmission when it's in the car, but this shifter has provision for stopping you from over shifting the transmission, and those adjustments are made actually underneath this rubber collar. All right, so mostly I wanted to have this removable so I could get at that rubber collar once the transmission's installed in the car. I didn't want to do it before that. Always think about servicing things when you're building things. Far too many cars, so like these little holes here, those are for grounds. I mean, it only took me a minute to put them in with the punch and the weld nuts. So I have 4 grounds
positioned on this tunnel, because you are going to need grounds, right, for various electrical things. Okay, and then finally, I'm not going to put the screws in. We all don't have time for that. Anyway, this is the look we're going for. It's got the nice rubber shift boot. Not too sure what I'm going to do surrounding the tunnel. Most likely it'll just get carpeted. Okay, so that's a wrap for this episode. Thank you very much for coming along. And it's nice to actually get some of these little pieces finalized, right? So all the trim bits and pieces are fitting in, and we're starting to round out the pieces of the car now in the project. So that's beginning to feel good. I still don't have the inside welded in the car. It's way too hot in the garage, and that's winter work, right? We can do that then. So we're gonna move along to some other projects in the next series of episodes. So stay tuned. All right, now before anybody points out that I should have seam welded the car, of course I seam welded the car.